So, hello everyone, and welcome to our book club. And so today is our session about the book, How India Works. And today we have the author of the book, Aarti Kelshikar, with us, and also our dear interviewer, Marie-Thérèse Class. So I'm Gregory Restelo. I'm based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So a bit about the agenda about today. So just maybe here is about Zoom. I guess that after 2 years, we all become expert of Zoom. So I won't share much about Zoom. In case you have technical questions, you can put questions in the chat box and I will answer them. Just one thing is that this session is recorded, right? And will be put on our website and social media. So in case you don't want to be seen, you can switch off your video. And a bit about SIETAR. So SIETAR is a Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research. And we are the Southeast Asian chapter of SIETAR. And we gather intercultural practitioners and everyone interested in intercultural matters. And we have a focus on Southeast Asia. We welcome people based in Southeast Asia and beyond. And we are part of a global network with chapters all around the world. And our mission is to encourage the development and application of knowledge, values, and skills, which enable effective intercultural and inter-ethnic relations at individual, group, organization, and community levels. And our values are listed on the slides, and they are openness, tolerance, diversity, and inclusion. And we have a team of volunteers. Some are here today, like Marie-Thérèse and Aarti. And we also have Joy Jenkins, based in Singapore. Seiji Nakano, based in London. Srivan Naidu, based in Singapore. So they are not here today, but they will be here next session. So just a bit about our speaker today, a bit about Aarti Kelshikar. Aarti is an intercultural coach with more than 15 years of work experience in India, Singapore, and the Philippines. She is a certified facilitator of cultural intelligence, and she is an accredited coach of the International Profiler. She's also a certified executive coach from the International Neuro Leadership Group, and she delivers intercultural training programs for senior executives working in multinationals. And before discovering this fascinating world of intercultural coaching, Aarti worked for more than 7 years in the area of securities market compliance. She has a master in business administration and a bachelor in commerce. And now Aarti is based in Singapore. So Aarti is the author of How India Works, Making Sense of a Complex Corporate Culture. This book is a guide to the cultural nuances and complexities of working with Indians. And today, Aarti will have a conversation with Marie-Thérèse on her book. There will be a Q&A after this conversation. So please feel free to ask questions all along the way by putting your question in the chat box, or you can keep your questions and raise your hand during the Q&A to ask your questions directly. So we look forward to this interesting conversation with Aarti and Marie-Thérèse. So Aarti and Marie-Thérèse, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, for this nice introduction. And welcome to the show. All of you all over the world. It was a great pleasure actually to talk to Aarti about her book. I know we are now all in a little circle here, but this is just your opportunity for us also to discover what we do in Southeast Asia, in the SIETAR of Southeast Asia. Aarti, you probably all know her from previous sessions where she has also been very, very active, also in interviewing people, etc. And it's been a great pleasure actually for me to read this book, which I have here, and to discover what I know about India, what I don't know about India, and how I can compare it with other countries in Southeast Asia. So Aarti, thank you very much for this book. I think it's a present to all of us who are able to read it. But my first question to you would be, how did this idea come up and how did you work?
Yeah. So first of all, hi, everybody. Thanks, Mary-Therese. Thanks, Greg, for that introduction. A lot of people here are familiar faces. So thank you for tuning in. And to all the people who are new, it's great to see you all as well. Okay, so in terms of your first question, how did I get on with it? I think that's a great question. So Greg mentioned about my background in regulatory compliance. So as you can imagine, I mean, it's like completely different from what I'm doing now. And so I'll talk a little bit about my journey and how that came to be. I think what happened was I used to work in regulatory compliance, but then as many of us, who are in this part of the world, who are used to moving as expats, as spouses, trailing spouses, right? The travails of working and living, as it were. And we moved to Manila in the Philippines, and for various reasons, which I won't get into now, I didn't work in regulatory compliance anymore, or I couldn't. And I got into this field of intercultural coaching, which was so interesting, so fascinating from anything that I had done before. And so I got caught up in that world. I started enjoying it, reading, training, all of that. And we moved back to Mumbai in 2012 with the family. And our daughter used to study at an international school in Mumbai. And, we would have conversations with expat parents who were based in Mumbai. And, they would ask questions informally, things like, how come Indians network the way they do? Or why do they say yes and not deliver? Things like that. And it got me thinking that surely there's a resource on something like that, right? Because I had, in my intercultural experience, I had come across books like this. I'd come across books like, working with the Americans, working with the Swiss, so on and so forth. So I did some sort of research and I realized that there were two kinds of books on India. One was this section where you talk about doing business, which was essentially, around negotiation and the tax and the financial and the legal, what have you. And then you had other books on art and culture and tourism, etc., right? Many things that India does offer. But I was more interested in kind of linking the two, in terms of culture and business complexities. And I couldn't find anything. And that's when I decided to write the book, because it was a topic that was close to my heart. It was something that I thought I could do, having had the experience of working, of also living as an expatriate in Southeast Asia. So that's when I decided to venture down this road. And I thought, in order to make it a broader, wider, deeper narrative, it would be good to speak to different people who've had similar experiences. So that was a fascinating process, because I spoke to a lot of people. I think I spoke to about 60 people, from 15 different countries, people who had worked, lived in India. They were people from academia, business, consulting, diplomats, consul generals, bankers, people in IT, people in HR. They were men, they were women. There were many Indians who, like us, had moved back and who had their own issues to deal with after being out of the country for so long and feeling this sense of disconnect. So so it was interesting. And I think that's really the USP of this book, which is that it is based in some amount of theory, but it also brings to light a lot of experiences, a lot of anecdotes, in a sense, both insider and outsider perspectives. And and I think that's what I wanted to bring about. In terms of who the book is for, I think it's for a combination of people who are not familiar with India, people who are familiar with India, and people who've repatriated. So I think that's the broad premise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, it's interesting that you have all these people from, expats, non-Indians, but also Indians with their own experience coming back to India, etc., which is, of course, a different perspective. One of the topics that you start with that seems to be also very important, not just in India, is the concept of hierarchy. And I was wondering when I was reading your book, is it really hierarchy, or is it a sense of respect for people? What is the difference there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is hierarchy. Okay, so that's, I think, the silent operator that kind of, is prevalent in a lot of interactions in India. And that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just the way it is. It's in terms of a hierarchy, it starts at home. Okay, it starts with the family structure where parents are, sitting on top of that order, right? And it's also a patriarchal system in many ways. So in some sense, the father is the head of the family, right? This then spills over to school, where the teacher is on top of that structure. And then you have work, where the boss is sitting on top, right? So, so there are various factors, there's age, there's hierarchy, all of which puts you on a pedestal. There could be respect, or there couldn't be respect. It's, sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not there, but hierarchy definitely is there. It exists, So oftentimes respect is the way it is manifested, right? The way hierarchy is manifested in terms of, people bow down to their parents for blessings, whether it's a birthday or a wedding or what have you, yeah? So, so I think it's pretty much prevalent. It is intertwined very often as well.
Mm-hmm. Because all the examples that you give very often, you show this a way of showing how you respect, not saying no and agreeing and not contradicting, etc. And okay, it's a little bit different from being obedient. There's more to it. There's more than just obedience. There seems to be a real sense that's the feeling I got of showing respect and not just obedience in the way they do it. For example, the use of titles. The use of titles is it a lot of titles, a lot of formalities? Is it because of the hierarchy, or is it because it's a way of talking with your peers, a kind of respectful way of interacting?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. So I think titles are in some ways a reflection of your position in society, right? India is an ascriptive society, as many societies are. And, I read a saying somewhere that if you don't have money, you need to have the rank, for people to respect you. Yeah. So ranks, titles, designations are super important. Not that they're not important in other countries and cultures, but they are particularly important in the Indian ecosystem. And I'll give you an example. I think there was this story in the book where, there is this colleague, there's this employee who is a business developer, and the company undergoes some sort of a transformation project, and because of which a lot of designations are shuffled and they're reworded. And he's now called a business manager or a territorial manager. And a month into this transition, he writes to the HR manager and he tells her that, thank you so much for this change in position, because of which the company has given wings to my dreams. And the reason for that is because he now gets married. He's had a wife, okay? So of course, this is for those who do have arranged marriages even now, and that is changing as we speak. But, for that, your position in society is super important, right? And so which is why titles, are a gateway to that, right? Because for this particular person, it was an indication of how his future earnings would be and whether he'll be able to give a life for his wife. So, so in that sense, I think titles are very important. People sometimes have qualifications on their visiting cards as well for the same reason, because they are a calling card to where you stand in the pecking order. So I think, and we had this conversation earlier, Marie-Thérèse, and I think that's what India is. It's not just the hierarchy. It's not just the face. It's also the personal connect, right? It's all of these drivers that come in different ways and means.
Yeah, but and it's very nice that you have all these stories in your book to illustrate your ideas. But it makes me think, what you've just said, it makes me think of something that I noticed, for example, in Thailand as well, where you have the impression that form is more important than content. So the title is more important than what you do, actually. And this seems to be a kind of Asian thing. I'm not sure if we can generalize it, but it seems to be like, you know, the title is very important. Your job doesn't change, but you get a title. So the form and seems to be more important. And you see this in many things, I think. Would you agree with that?
I would say the form is important, but I think more than form and content, I would say it's content and context, and that's again true for a lot of Asia, but I think again, it's quite true in the Indian context or in the Indian situation. There is, it's people like to know the backstory. People like to have more information, right? It's great if you share the bigger picture. It's also, not a society where they give a lot of importance to the externals. So for example, if you contrast it with Japan, for example, where, there is so much emphasis on perfection, right? Whether it's a gift or it's, a plate of sushi, right? There's so much attention on the way it is presented. That is not given the same level of importance, I think, in India. So to that extent, I wouldn't say it's as much about form, which is when even the concept of Jugaad, right, which is basically, about, the presentation not being super important, right? It's a quick fix. So, and
Can
the
you
other
explain
piece
a little
about
bit more of what this Jugaad, what it means actually?
Yeah. So Jugaad is, it's basically a form of, if I have to explain it simply, it would be something like creative problem solving. It's like a temporary fix. Okay, just to give a very random example, it could be, so you have rickshaws in India, and they're like the tuk-tuks in Thailand. And so, for example, if it's raining, you see a rickshaw driver, just adding this thick sheet of plastic on the side so as to ward off water. So is that a permanent solution? Of course not. But it may be an effective temporary solution, at best. So it's manifested in so many areas, of personal, social, and professional life. And I think Indians are particularly good at it. Again, it could be a good thing. It could be not a great thing as well, right? As in everything. And it's got a downside because oftentimes it's, quality can be shortchanged, right? Yeah, I see a comment. There's even a book on Jugaad. Yes, there is. There are many books on Jugaad, actually. And I think Indians take it to a fine form. It's not just in India, though. I came across some material that it's also in Korea by a different name, in terms of improvisation, in terms of, just giving another name to it, right? So, yeah, so I think broadly that's what Jugaad is about.
Right. Coming back to this idea, because I've been thinking, and it really bothers me a little bit, this idea of hierarchy. And on the one hand, there is hierarchy, okay. On the other hand, as a manager, you have to be flexible. This is, you repeat several times that you have to be flexible in India, but not too flexible. So how does one manage?
Yeah, so that's a good question again. Okay, so let me give you this anecdote, about how the boss is perceived. This isn't in the book. This was actually shared, by somebody else later after the book was out. So, so this South African expat, moved to Mumbai. He was, a senior person in a large FMCG company, and he was kind of grappling with Asia and India and all of that, and he realized that there was this custom of celebrating birthdays, in the organization. and people who would distribute chocolates like a Kit Kat bar, on the day on their birthday to everybody. So he kind of liked that. He said, okay, it's a unique thing, it's different, whatever. So when it was his birthday, he told his secretary that, could you please order the required Kit Kats for consumption and distribution in the office? And he said, she was shocked. She said, you can't be giving Kit Kats. So he said, why not? She said, because you're the boss. He said, how does it matter? Because there are 100 employees. She just shrugged, And I think that's a great way to, explain that the chocolate bar had to be, bigger and better, because that's what the boss in India is, right? Now, having said that, that's true for a lot of hierarchical cultures, right? It's not just India. But there are certain nuances, people are, he's put up there, he's on a pedestal, he's expected to behave in a certain manner, okay? He's expected to carry a certain air of authority, right? And I've talked a little bit about that, about, even how women are perceived, you have to be, you have to sound assertive enough. It is an alpha male leadership model, really. And it is changing, and this, I don't mean to stereotype, and I think this is a caveat that needs to go out, that for every truth in India, there is a counter truth, right? So I might say this, but you might have, or people in the audience might have a completely different experience, right? And that is India for you, right? So there really are, as Joan Robinson said, she was Amartya Sen's teacher, that whatever you say about India, the opposite is also true, right? Yes. So I just want to, put that in perspective here as we're talking. Yeah. So, so in terms of, the boss, so people are expected to, again, depending on the organization, culture, etc., people are expected to behave in a certain way. If you're too accessible, that's not a good sign. So, you have that balance, right? And I think it comes with a certain judgment. It comes with sensing, right? Is there a formula to this? Is there a manual to this? Of course, there isn't, right? I think, and this is where, as interculturalists, we can appreciate, right? This is when a culturally intelligent leader, right, would use some of his judgment, would use some of his EQ and CQ to kind of figure out and say, okay, these are some things that seem to be prevalent in this society. Maybe in this case, I can, be a little more hierarchical. Maybe in this case, I can step back a little bit and let people, do a little bit more of their own thinking, or, deciding. So it is a balance in many ways that has to be drawn by the leader, but I think just knowing that there isn't one answer or one way of behaving in these kind of situations is very helpful, Right. So it is complicated, because the boss is expected to have the knowledge, the experience, and the answers, right? You are a dispenser of solutions, but you can change your style. So for example, there was this gentleman who came, from the US, and he had this very participative style. He didn't want to sit in the corner office. He was sitting, with everybody else. He would ask his colleagues, what do you think of this? Do you think we should do this, or should we do this? And to nobody's surprise, really, a few months down the line, he realized that he wasn't really respected, and he was upset, because this stint meant a lot for him in his career. But he said, okay, you know what, let me not take this personally. This is to do with, not with me, but because of the larger cultural nuances, right? And so what he did was, he said, okay, let me adapt. So he formulated this, this compromise, okay, where he would ask his colleagues to come up with at least 3 solutions. And then he, being the boss, would use a boss hat and say, okay, I pick one. So he thought that was a good way of tweaking, right? Yeah. He's participative in his center, his cultural viewpoint. At the same time, he's, working around the local sensibilities. So the different ways how people adapt, how they empower employees. I knew another expat, actually somebody from India, who was so used to, being in the background, that he found it difficult, not to do the same. So he would, again, sometimes he would not be in meetings, so that he would allow other people to take decisions. So it just depends, you wade in, you pick, you choose, you sense, you judge. Yeah, all of that.
Mm-hmm. There are two things I will pick out from what you've just said. The one is you have to show your role, your position, right? And again, this form, you have to dress like a boss. You have to dress like a social class. You have to dress the role. So again, it's the form that is very important, I think. And the other thing is a very intriguing idea of how do you give feedback in that case? You know, if there is so much respect and form. One of the issues that I hear very often in Southeast Asia is you should not judge the result. You should judge the effort. So evaluate not the result, but the effort, the input of people, etc. Do you have any comment on that?
That's a tough one, you know, because I think I've mentioned that in the book as well, that you know, giving feedback and feedback being received by employees, they tend to be particularly thin-skinned, you know, and there are various reasons for that, you know, because people tend to be very emotionally attached to their work. You know, they, you know, they work, not that others don't, but they are very driven and they are emotionally invested, I think a lot more culturally. So that's a tough one. And that's how they actually justify, right? Like somebody will say, oh, I worked all night, but I wasn't able to do it, right? So is it the effort, to your point, or is it the outcome? And, you know, and I think that's when the manager comes in and, you know, coaches the team and says, you know, that I appreciate your effort, but at the same time, we do need to get certain things done, right? In that sense, I feel that while people can be thin-skinned, people are also hugely driven in the Indian ecosystem, right? I mean, there is a lot of aspiration, there is a lot of competition. You know, people want to stand out, people want to go the extra mile. So, you know, they can be very easily, this can resonate with them, you know, in terms of working hard and getting the outcomes. But to be able to communicate that, you know, in a feedback that is palatable is can be challenging. You know, I think in a lot of countries in Asia, yes.
Right, right. Also, one intriguing point in your book I found was that you make this opposition between, well, between national and traditional. You say India is at the same time national and traditional. It's a both and culture in a way, right? But what does that mean actually? That being national and being traditional, is there an opposition there?
Yeah, sorry. So you said being rational and traditional, right?
Rational.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I think again there lies another dichotomy, right, in the Indian ecosystem. So, so what I discovered was, you know, that people, you know, seamlessly do things, right? I mean, you could be going for a wedding, or you could be, if there is a religious function, you attend that, you come back to work, you fast, you go to the temple on the way back. You know, a lot of times idols, you know, of certain gods are kept, you know, in the office. You know, religion is not off limits in corporate India, large, I mean, to the extent that you could have some deity, you know, right in the front in the lobby, or you could have something in the car, you know, so there is less of a barrier. It kind of spills over. And, you know, so you have everything spilling over, right? You have work and life, work and family, oftentimes work and religion. And to my mind, I mean, I think it's pretty seamless, you know, and I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. It seems to be quite, you know, it seems to be quite amazing in the way, you know, one begins and the other ends, so to speak. So I think that's one piece of it. The other piece is, you know, the fact that Indians are, you know, inner directed in some ways. Yeah. So if we go back to, you know, if you go back to history, you know, I mean, you know, many years ago. So, you know, there was a lot of fertile soil, etc., etc. So, you know, in terms of cultivation, in terms of how the initial settlers in India, you know, started out, they kind of moved up the Maslow's theory, you know, hierarchy of needs pretty quickly. Okay, so they kind of moved up and, you know, were into self-actualization in a sense. So which probably explains the Indians, interest in spirituality, in yoga, right? Indians have put priests and thinkers and spiritual gurus right at the apex of the social pyramid, yeah, more than conquerors or corporate honchos, right? So it's a lot about being. Okay, so what it basically means is that there is a lot of intuitive thinking. In fact, Steve Jobs, when he visited India years ago backpacking, he writes that to a friend in his in his one of his books, that I'm surprised to see that the way Indians think is far more intuitive. That sense is very well developed than in the rest of the world. So there is that intuitiveness. That said, there is also this amazing ability to deal with numbers, right? As many people may have experienced. But if you put aside that, if you put aside the numbers and the analytical piece, there is a great accent on the intuitiveness, on the spiritual, on the being, and less on the practical side of things, less on how things work, which probably explains why there is a bit of detachment or indifference on the environment, and the way it is, the sorry state of neglect that so many monuments and so many things in India have, right? Probably because of this accent and this focus on the inner things, the things that give meaning to people and purpose.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, for a foreigner, it's not always easy to live with this non-separation of work and life and religion, and everything is mixed up at the same time. And a foreigner might have need for his or her own private time and private office and closed doors and what have you, which in India in a way would be seen as maybe not appropriate. So how would a foreigner manage that?
So, people find their ways and means of doing things, right? I mean, you don't have to, while they say be in Rome, do as the Romans do, but you don't have to, incorporate every single aspect, right? I think as long as you accept that this is how culturally some things are done, and there can be intrusions in your private space. For example, I've talked about how questions can be asked, right? And that's not a challenge just for non-Indians. Yeah, it's also a challenge for a lot of people, in terms of how questions can be asked that are pretty intrusive at times. So, but you find ways and means of drawing the boundaries, and people get that slowly and surely. People can understand. It might take some time, but people do get that. Yeah.
Right. If you could give somebody who has to go and work in India, if you could give them 3 things that they should know, or they should be careful of, or they should notice in order to work with Indians, what would you say?
Okay. So and this would also be relevant to people on the call perhaps who work with Indians, right? I mean, it's not just people who move there on work. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think the first piece is about building trust and connect. Now again, much has been said and talked about, but okay, so if you look at it broadly, I think Erin Mayer puts it very nicely in her book, The Culture Map. Where she talks about the 2 categories of trust. Yeah, you have cognitive trust, and then you have affective trust. And cognitive trust is, of course, trust that comes from the head. It comes from your achievements. It comes from your work, and you say that the work is good, and then you trust it. Whereas affective trust is, when it comes from feelings of empathy and closeness and friendship, right? Mm-hmm. So no prizes for guessing where India lies on that. I wouldn't say that it's completely effective, but it's definitely veering towards that. So I think it's very important for people to, when they're interacting with Indians, to, provide, more business context, to share the picture, of what, the organization is doing, what are the future plans, where do they see these particular colleagues, how do they see them fitting in, are they important to the scheme of things? And that is one way of building trust and commitment and buy-in, right? Because that's one thing that people have seen, that when you do all of this, you know, they just rise to the occasion. So that's, you know, one piece. So I would say, you know, don't focus only on the outcomes and the results and the process, right? Also focus on the softer aspects, you know, because of this whole effective trust. So, you know, show interest in colleagues, you know, be open about about your life, talk to them about their interests. People have often bonded, you know, on a cup of chai or on a, you know, with a game of cricket, yeah, even if they don't understand it. So whatever works, whatever feels authentic, and, you know, doesn't expect you to, you know, go completely outside of your comfort zone. But I think that's important. And so that's one piece in terms of building trust, building connect. The other would be about, you know, being flexible and, you know, going with the flow, which is possibly a tall ask. I think for people who are used to order and discipline, who are looking for, you know, clarity and certainty, they're not going to find that, you know, much of it at least. It is a lot about, you know, it's very nebulous, it's ambiguous. So what I found people learning to do was, you know, saying, okay, if this can happen, that can happen. Let's have a plan B. Let's have a plan C sometimes, you know. So to be able to anticipate delays or changes in government policy, or, you know, things like that. So to be able to, you know, be able to work around that is a very, very key quality. Yeah. You can have multiple boxes open. Oftentimes the straight and narrow isn't the only way to do things in India. Yeah. So I think that's, you know, that's one piece. The third would be around communication. And this is where, ironically, I found that a lot of expats, a lot of people had issues with. On one hand, you have Indians speaking fairly decent English, right? You know, on a certain level. Not everybody, but you know, it's you can manage, right? You can work your way around that for sure. At the same time, there are lots of communication nuances, you know, in terms of speaking, in terms of listening, in terms of not listening, all of that, right? Um, so, you know, so a lot of people, what they did was, once they understood the way people communicated, the way people worked around the yes and the no, and understood that the yes does not come from a place of malice, you know, to be able to coach your teams and to say, you know, no respectfully, yeah, in a way that they can do, because that's not something that they have been taught. You know, how do you say no in a way that does not offend, right? How do you give realistic deadlines? You know, do you say yes for anything, or are you able to figure this out? How can you be more succinct? Yeah. So to be able to, you know, adapt, and to be able to get your teams to adapt, you know, a little bit. So you meet in the middle, right? So, so I think these are three big things that I think would work well in the Indian context.
Yeah, Aarti, there's a comment here, and that's also I wanted to address anyway. Of course, India is a huge country. It's I mean, it's actually many countries, and there are certainly many differences. But also, as we are here in Southeast Asia, are there any differences, or what would make India different from I would say Southeast Asia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, you know, if I had to think of a few things, one would be the individual versus collective piece. Okay. And I think that's really interesting because, you know, in my experiences and my interactions with people from both sides of the globe, people tend to think that Asians are, you know, collective, right? And that's possibly true for a lot of Asians. So while India is also clubbed under that collective piece, I think there is a difference in terms of, you know, I think Indians are collective in the personal and the social arenas, right? So when it comes to, you know, a congregation, when it comes to a wedding, you know, when it comes to all of these things, it's all about the family, the extended family, which can run into hundreds, right? So it's a very collective society. When it comes to work, when it comes to the professional areas, in my opinion, it is really more about the individual, okay? And the reason for that is because it's so competitive. You know, you have to stand out, you have to make way for yourself. And the system awards and rewards you, right? If you go up the ladder, right? So in many ways, it's, when it comes to work, results, performance, it's a very individualistic society, So somebody had, mentioned this in his book, I forget the name, he had written about how, Indians are like lone wolves, they don't know how to hunt together in packs, right? And the general consensus is that while Indians could be, easy to get along with, provided, all of that, they're not the best team players. And people in the audience could have a completely different opinion, and that's fine, right? But I'm telling you, in terms of a broader picture, in terms of some of the experiences and observations. So, I tell you about this joke, right? So some years ago, an Indian automobile company, Maruti, had a collaboration with a Japanese company, Suzuki. Okay, this was many years ago. And there was this joke that was going around in certain circles where they said that, if like one Indian, okay, they said, oh, Indians are, very talented and smart and all of that. So they said one Indian is equal to 10 Japanese, okay? But 10 Indians are not equal to one Japanese, okay? So, just to give you a perspective, I mean, again, take this with a pinch of salt. I mean, obviously there will be, there is a level of exaggeration there, but just to give you a big picture. So I think, I mean, my personal opinion based on a lot of the experiences is that, it's more individual society when it comes to work. So it's slightly different, from Southeast Asia. People, once they have the confidence, they will express. And if you've noticed, a lot of Indians are very expressive, very articulate, not afraid to be opinionated at all, once the shackles of hierarchy are broken. So, so you do have that one experience. The other thing is, related to that is the expressive piece. Yeah, people are able to express. If you see talk shows in India, if you see news channels, I mean, people are just shouting all over each other. So they're not afraid to express and, express themselves in a good way or in whatever ways. So I think that's, again, another exception. But the caveat to that is that while people speak, they may not necessarily speak up, because of hierarchy and because of what we've discussed, right? The other piece is possibly to do with ambiguity and managing ambiguity. I find that is a big difference, in Southeast Asia, in terms of, Indians are used to, because things are so unpredictable, so unstructured, right? They're very used to fending for themselves and adapting in an ambiguous environment, right? So they're great in a VUCA world. They operate beautifully in the gray. It's not about the black, it's not about the white, and I find that is so not the case in many other countries, right? Whether it's the West or whether it's East Asia, right? I'm not saying, again, it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, but clearly as, events have unfolded over the last few years, I think being able to deal with VUCA is increasingly an asset, right? So I think these would be three broad differences.
Yeah, Aarti, you lived and worked in the Philippines and in Singapore. So what were the surprises when you first arrived in the Philippines, or you first arrived in Singapore? What were the surprises?
Okay. Yeah, so I think, you're right. It's, sometimes you feel, that you're familiar, you're Asian, right? How difficult, how different is it going to be, right? And in that sense, sometimes I think your frame of reference is sometimes, it can be challenging. I think what I miss in Singapore is the vibrancy of India. Okay, if I have to put it in a sentence, yes, India is extremely chaotic. It's crazy on so many levels, but there is a raw magnetism. There is a raw energy, which I don't find in, in Singapore. Of course, Singapore has so many other pluses, right? I mean, you have the time and the discipline, and you have things that go from A to B, and you know what your day will look like. But big picture, there are times when you miss the madness. So I think that's one. In the Philippines, it was interesting because, people were so sensitive and so soft-spoken, and so friendly and so polite. So it was funny because when we moved back to India, it was actually a case of reverse culture shock, because I wasn't used, after 5 years in the Philippines, I kind of got used to talking in a certain way and behaving in a certain way, right? And then you move back to a country where everything is amplified. So it was difficult for me initially because I realized that if I spoke in that soft-spoken way, I wasn't going to be taken seriously. So I had to up my game and I had to be a lot more assertive. So it was strange, I mean, how, experiences and how people can change and shape you. Yeah.
It's interesting you make this distinction. Actually, in India, you say the private life is more collectivist, and work would be, at work people would be more individualistic. So there's a kind of shifting from one kind of identity to another, and a kind of behavior to another. And there was a question here, I think it was Vincent, who also said, is there a change in the younger generation because they travel, because they study abroad? And do you think that there's a change going on where, they become more individualistic also in their family life and private life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the generation, the youngsters, the millennials and the Z generation, or whatever you call them, they are a different ball game, right? I mean, they're like millennials, everywhere else, hooked onto their phone, hooked onto social media. So I think they are different. I think on some level, the hierarchy is ingrained. So, they would have respect for elders, etc. But it's manifested far differently, So, I have a daughter who's 21 and, she's fairly international, having lived in a lot of places, etc. And I see my nephews and nieces, and I see a lot of the younger generation and their friends. And they don't have much regard for the rituals. We went along, we kind of said, okay, let's not upset people, let's just do it. If it's not going to hurt anybody, it doesn't matter. But they're pretty clear about their do's and their don'ts, what they want to compromise on and what they don't want to. So I think there is more clarity. They're not too bothered about hurting or offending. So there is a shift towards individualism for sure, and it's a good thing, right? Because they are their own priorities. They know what they want, in terms of their needs and their career aspirations, etc. So yeah, I think there is definitely more individualism in that generation.
And there is, of course, this theory that as a country develops, it becomes more individualistic, and when it becomes more richer and industrialized, it would become more individualistic. And Mithun here added, and it may be true, it's the same everywhere, this urbanization creates a different kind of life. You're not in the country, you're not in the village where everybody's taking care of everybody, where everybody's taking care of the children that run around. Of course, when you're in a city, urbanization changes society. But of course, in India, there are huge cities, but also there's a huge countryside, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, are they growing apart in culture?
That's a tough one to answer. I mean, India, as they say, lives in its villages, so there is a lot of, some of these nuances are even more pronounced there. That said, a lot of these people, migrate to the cities in their quest for a better life. And, social media has only accelerated that change, right? And that exodus. So I think only time will tell, in terms of where it's going. But it is, it is getting more diluted in some manner, shape or form for sure throughout the country.
Yeah, there's a shift going on there, right?
Yes, I think so, yes.
And I mean, these young people who come back, as you said, from studying abroad, etc., etc. If they show less respect, although I think they still do, but maybe in a different way, but does it create clashes with the older generation?
Not really, because I think, so much has been written and, talked about, right, in terms of the younger generation, etc. So I think in my generation, our generation, I think people kind of, you want to be a good mother, you want to be a friend, right, a parent who's a friend. So I think we've grown up differently in terms of, wanting to be friends with our kids, etc. So I think we are slightly more understanding, in a sense, we are sandwiched between the older generation where, which expect certain behaviors, and the younger generation which expect completely different behaviors. So yeah, so I think it's evolving, and only time will tell.
So if that happens in I would say life, does it also happen at work? Because I guess that the bosses are a different generation, and how does that work?
Yeah, and there is a lot of, there are a lot of studies being done to address all of this, right? I mean, what do millennials want? Because, if they're not happy, they'll just leave. They want purpose, they want meaning, right? The good thing is that there is this whole startup entrepreneurial industry that has spawned in India, with all of these people just starting, industries and jobs on their own. So that is a whole shift again, which is happening, where they're their own bosses, and but in terms of when they're working in the corporate sector, yeah, I think people are being increasingly cognizant of how can we make them happy, how can we reassess priorities, and especially now with COVID and pandemic, where everything is being reevaluated, right? Whether it's a hybrid work structure, whether it's employee satisfaction, well-being, all of these things come right front and center. So I think, millennials and their happiness is just one of the many themes that will come up as we go along.
Yeah, Aarti, we want to leave a lot of time for questions and answers, etc. But I have one last question that really intrigues me: is how, as a foreigner, can you interpret and can you live and can you work with this yes can do? It's always yes can do. How do you manage that if you're not familiar with Indian culture, and you have to work there, and you have how do you manage this yes can do?
Yeah, so so I think in terms of the first thing is, of course, knowing what to expect, right? I mean, I know of people who've come in and they thought that something would be delivered when it was committed to be, and they were surprised when work hadn't even started on that. Again, here there's a caveat that not everybody works like this, right? You do have people who are very, very driven and operate at a completely different level. So yeah, so the first thing is, I think, just knowing what to expect. Okay, so I think that's a great starting point. In terms of how to navigate, whether it's the head wag, whether it's how people commit, whether it's verbal or non-verbal cues. Again, I think it comes with understanding, it comes with building a sense of how to read this. Initially it takes time, yeah, but as you get better at it, you realize how to read between the lines. That's one thing. The other thing is being able to, build realistic deadlines, being able to follow up. And I think that's a big piece where people just, it needs to be clarified. I mean, do they mean yes? By when does it mean yes? Is it going to be done tomorrow? Is it going to be done day after? So once a deadline is in place, there is an element of following up that is required to be done. And that's something again that I've talked about. So you can't just assume that because somebody has committed it to it being done, like yes can do by next week, it is going to be done. So so to be able to assess that, and when you're assessing that, when you are doing the realistic expectation setting, it's very important to have open-ended questions. Because if in the Indian context or in a lot of Asia, right? I mean, if you say, can you do this? You're going to hear a yes, 9 times out of 10, right? And it could be because of all the things that we discussed. It's hierarchy, it's loss of face, it's respect, it's, just all of these nuances. So it's best to kind of work around it and, kind of get them to, assess for themselves where they are and whether they'll be able to commit. So it's best to ask open-ended questions. So it's a style, it's a strategy that comes in, whether you like it or not, it comes in with experience, with practice. As I said, I think it helps if you know that these are some of the things that you may be expected to do. Yeah. Knowing this is halfway done, honestly, from my experience. So, and people adapt, if you've been in other places in Asia, that this is not unique in Asia, right? It's very challenging for somebody who's come fresh off the board from maybe a Germany or a Switzerland. And, you know, it's, I mean, India is their first port of call. I mean, I think that would be very tough to manage. But if you kind of figured that, and you've lived in Thailand, right? I mean, Greg has lived in China. A lot of us have lived across, even in the Philippines, right? You know, people are reticent to say no. So it's not just an Asian thing. So I think these are tools we've kind of figured how to navigate.
Yeah, so actually it is like in many countries in Southeast Asia, it is open questions. Never ask a yes or no question, because the answer will be yes and you don't get the information. And the other thing is check, check, check. When you have a project or a job going on, is check and check and check again, right? Where are they? What are they doing? How is it going? Yeah.
Yes.
And once you've got more interference from the boss. Yeah.
Yes, and once you've got a sense of the team and you know that, okay, these 3 guys can be trusted completely, these 3 guys you need to follow up, you know, so you tweak your style and adapt accordingly.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Aarti. I mean, you've, I think, told us a lot. And in the book, there are many stories and many examples of illustrating all these things. And